fascia. I've never heard of it, but Mina's told me all about it this morning. She loves it. Fascia is considered controversial by some celebrities, such as Gwyneth Paltrow. Gwyneth Paltrow, she's talking about it and considering to try it out. Body posture expert Liza Egboga joins us now to debunk the truths and myths around treating fascia. So Gwyneth Paltrow does do it?
Well, so she's a fan of fascia. So sometimes when you get certain celebrities that may not be qualified talking about something, people think that, you know, it's not legitimate.
What I love about Gwyneth Paltrow is she brings things to the table. She enlightens us with different ways that maybe things that we might want to get involved with or we might not.
Absolutely.
We didn't know about.
And the thing is, fascia is not something that's made up. So it's a tangible thing in our body. The only thing is, most of it actually looks like saran wrap in our body, and it's a connective tissue that goes throughout the body. It helps to support tissue and literally connects everything in your body and encases it from your nerves to your muscles to your joints to even your organs.
So fascia is in our body.
It is, and it's everywhere in your body.
So what are we going to do this morning?
So what we're going to do is, so a lot of times people, when it comes to any kind of trauma or any kind of stress or injury, they will actually store some of that in their fascia.
Okay.
So we have a memory that, you know, so say we go through a traumatic event like a car accident, it takes our brain a while to process that, which is why some people go through shock. But our fascia and the cells in that fascia respond to it immediately and have a memory of that. So sometimes people store that memory in their fascia.
Ooh.
And research has shown that the cells in our fascia will actually hold on to that.
But we don't want them to hold on to it.
Exactly. And when you hold on to it, it can lead to pain. So you can get headaches, you can get back pain, you get knee pain, foot pain, literally from trauma being stored in your body that you haven't dealt with.
That, you know.
Yeah, and you don't even, it's not even conscious to you because you stored it in your body and it's happened when you didn't even realize it.
Okay, so what do we do to help with this?
When I first did your dissection, I was fairly confident with, I got skin and superficial fascia, I kind of got that, and then muscles, but then there was this stuff that you know, my study of my books and my anatomy wasn't bad, I thought. Little did I know. And then there was stuff that there was just no name for. There was just bits, there were threads. And the anatomy books, to me, any time I look, there's nothing in those books that really explain those interfaces that we can feel and touch and move around and slow down. And it sort of frustrates me because everything is based, you read people on Facebook go, oh, well, this is rubbish and this is rubbish, but their view is based around standardized anatomy, stuff they've never seen in a lab, stuff they've never seen in a dissection. They're so sure and clear about it based upon their training. And that's frustrating. So when you get an email of stuff that we haven't, give us a function for it.
Well, yeah, I guess it's already been named. It's called humility, and it's just not often used. It's not often applicable to people. And the thing is, like you say you didn't study your books very well. And I was pausing you. I go, you can study your books perfectly and not know what to do or not know what's there because the books don't include everything, as you're saying. So it's not a matter of whether or not you've mastered your books. It's whether the books have mastered their subject, and they haven't. It's almost impossible to do so, and that's why I always refer to this as my text, right? Because this one never lies. You know, this is the text that am I going to argue with the body about what's in a body? No, I can't really argue with that.
There's stuff that you say like, what's that? And you peel something off, and there's a sort of skinny little bit of, and you go, that's fascia innominatus, that's unnamed fascia, or an unnamed tissue.
It's the ligament of Julian. You know, I say that all the time because there's so much in there. And what's interesting is where the flags have been posted, and what has, in other words, if a flag's been posted somewhere in the body with someone's name or made it into the book, then we believe it's important. It's like because something made it on the news, it must be important, so we'll watch. Same thing, because it made it in the book, that tissue must be important, so we'll stare at it, when in fact it might not be the most relevant tissue in the region that you're studying, with respect to the problem that you're encountering. So I see that along these unnamed fascias, just general classes of fascia that you encounter in a dissection that don't get any attention at all in a book. There's just not enough pages in the books.
The other end of the scale, you've got the humility of going, well, I don't know what it is, but also then you've got the arrogance of assumed knowledge that says, well, I know everything there is to know about the body, and therefore anything that is not listed in a book or anything that I don't know, we know everything there is to know, when clearly there's all these interfaces and all these structures that we have no idea about.
Well, and they won't even be seen. They'll be invisible. In other words, if you're going to do a book dissection, you're just going to cut out all of the irrelevant stuff that wasn't in the book, and you'll be back to the book again. You say, see, there it is, how beautiful. You'll compliment one another on what a great dissection it is. I take pictures of half-done dissections because they're the interesting ones to me, because it shows you the continuities of the things that are refined in these very abstract pictures. Let's get a little less abstract and look at what's actually there. Muck our way through the relationships. You have to muck your way through relationships a bit, rather than creating separate and separable entities through anatomization. That then we can see, we can tick the boxes. This one fits here, and this one fits here, and this one fits here, but that's not what it was. So who cares?
So let's be specific, because there's a specific thing. And I was reading something last night about a guy who was telling us very clearly what iliotibial syndrome was. And yet my puzzle when I go in there is you can't even see this iliotibial band. You go into it, take the skin and superficial fascia, and then there's this whole sheet of tissue.
Right.
And so my question is that just because you have a tensional bit, is the rest of it less important functional structure, all the bit that's then been trimmed away and thrown in the bin to make that picture? Surely there must be some function or structure around the rest of that.
There's no function in what's remaining without it.
Okay, that's a good point. So no function in what's remaining without the stuff that you've thrown away.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Without those relationships, the thing that's been isolated is no longer functional. Now it's a toy. You just made a toy. It's not functional anatomy anymore. You just made a toy. That having been said, when your attention is called to something in the body, why would they cut it there? Well, because we see this intense fibrous mapping going on in this broader tissue, and you can make it. You can abstractly define it and attribute function to it based on the vectors of the fibers well enough. However, those fiber vectors in themselves are not a functional reality. They've never done anything on their own the way they're being depicted. They're only functioning in relationship to everything else. That's the way it's got to be.
Similar to the barn move, we talk about this move here, but in similar vein, you've also got the fibers reaching across the structure that we're thinking about into lots of different areas, and so again, you've got this sort of distant cause from both the structure and maybe the move itself. And
yeah, that's right. And causation is always very complex, and even in this thing we're talking about, it's not a simple structure.
No, sure.
Because you can look at even what's been carved out and called this strap, this iliotibial band. You can look at that and say, oh my gosh, I have always seen 3 layers in it. There are 2 that are circumferential, the outer and the inner, and then there's the middle layer that's going vertical. So even if you point to this odd square inch of tissue,
sure,
what direction are the fibers going?
And then you look at it from the inside. You peel it back and look at it from the inside, and the directions that it's taking from the inside are completely different.
Yeah, and we could even say they're and they're an arcing. They're arcs. Yeah. They're not even straight lines. We know that if you draw it on a piece of paper, you'd go, look, it's a grid, but think, no, it's an arc.
So then it begs the question: does it matter if the power is in the touch and the power is in the intent? Does it really matter what we do?
It can, because I'd rather go to a well-trained therapist than someone who knows nothing. And in other words, I think there is. As I always say, we have to approach the body humbly. It's so complex a system, and yet, if I'm going to get brain surgery, I'd rather have it be with a humble brain surgeon than a humble, mop man.
That's brain surgery, though. I mean, you're not going to get a mop man to go, could you open my skull? I mean, that's...
You know what I'm saying, though? I'm just saying here we go then. So even the brain surgeon must stand with awe and humility before the complexity of the body and question her skills and and intent and mastery of the knife or the saw or the drill or the process itself, whatever the goal is through that particular surgery. You want to have all that knowledge and still proceed humbly in the face of the infinite complexity of the body that we can't explain. And that's whether you're a bone therapist or brain surgeon, doesn't matter. The bone therapists too, they've been to the classes, they got A's on the tests, they're certified, they're advanced certified, whatever it is, right? All that means is you have more permission to stand humbly before the body and listen. Hopefully, because if you're just going to get bossy because of all your degrees and such, well, then you will bear fruit for that.
Yeah, you are masters at what you do. I mean, there are people that will give themselves that label of masters, which puzzled me. But so, Viscera, you turned me on to Viscera. You know, I got to that layer first, the first class I did with you, and I literally left crying. You know, I was.
You and many others. It's intimidating.
By it or grossed out by it. I was just didn't know anything about it. I was very intimidated by it. I was very overwhelmed and overcome by it. And you still unfairly. I hope you still say, I love the Viscera now. I love it. You know, last 2 or 3 years I've got into it.
Glad to hear it.
I'm pulling this stuff around.
Yeah.
It's great. So I'm a great fan of it now. So you can drop the stuff about me not liking Viscera.
Done.
But I'm not sure why I like it. It's very cool. It's awesome stuff. And I'm also not sure about, with apologies to any visceral manipulators, this is for Bowen people specifically, but I'm not sure about the whole visceral manipulation thing. I think any movement is great, but I've heard people say I can locate the hepatoduodenal duct, and I'm going, well, I can just about do it with a scalpel and several years of practice, so I'm not sure you can necessarily find that with your fingers. And if you can, what do you think you're doing?
I think you'd be surprised, actually, at the level of specificity that can be achieved through intense practice with regard to sensation and difference and just paying attention. That we don't get when we're dissecting, right?
Sure.
Because you don't have this energetic wave coming off of a tissue that has its own character that can be felt in the living. So I'll give them that, for one thing. And same as any other therapy, you can have your idea of what you're doing, you can have your successes, and whether what you're doing is what you think you're doing is a whole nother story. So I've listened to osteopaths, brilliant osteopaths, who spend 8 hours a day sitting at the end of the table doing craniosacral osteopathy. Brilliant therapists with great results. And I've been to them and said, so what was going on there? And listened to their story. And I'm like, very interesting. It's an interesting story. And working within that story, that person achieves great results. That doesn't make the story true.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's something I've come to terms with over the years, that I'm happy to go, I'm not really sure exactly. 15 years ago, I'd given you chapter and verse about we're doing this and we're doing this and this is how it works. And now I get that it's a story and that it's a
I could tell the story, that there's a scarab beetle pushing the sun across the sky, and that it will set at the end of the day because the scarab beetle will bury it like he does his other little dung balls. And if you were a 5-year-old living in whatever time, you might be like, cool, that's amazing. And it's true. Look, it happens every day. You don't see the scarab beetle because it's an invisible scarab beetle, but it doesn't matter. This is about how we talk about the things that we do.
If it's got 5-year-olds at home, just do try this. How it goes, because if I did have one still, I would definitely be doing that. It's a great story. But it is a story. It is the convincing story. I think kind of the story matters for the client and the therapist.
I'm not telling you not to have a story. I agree.
Yeah,
the story does matter. It may build confidence and rapport with the client, the patient, or the client, however you want to call them. They want to know, what are you doing? And you can speak, but don't BS your way through that answer. To the best of my knowledge, or lately I think, and that's the best I could say because we're dealing with the infinite complexity of the body, and all I can tell you is I get good results. Rather than giving some tap dance BS story that with complete confidence, as if that confidence is what they need, or as if that's what builds confidence. Actually, humility builds confidence, but humility with knowledge.
So you've been, how long have you been doing this dissection live now for?
This is the 22nd season.
And 22 years. And does anything, do you still get surprised when you open up
Every single time.
Yeah.
Everybody's new. Can we pay attention to each other and notice our uniqueness? Sure, that's what I'm doing. So I haven't seen the same body twice, and every time I go into one, it's the first time anyone's ever been in there, except maybe a couple surgeons. So and so it's constantly new and refreshing that
so I know
way.
you don't have a hands-on practice to speak of anymore, but
No.
do you think that you would be able to translate that in terms of seeing, having seen thousands of bodies that are all different? Do you think that would influence and your hands-on work?
Absolutely.
In terms of how you.
Oh, for sure. And I do work with my family, my kids, and friends and such, and my work has become very gentle and very intuitive.
As a result of
gentle and intuitive. In other words, if I can trust that the body will heal itself, I can also trust my own hands to participate in that healing of the human body that we all share, right? So, in other words, it's that interaction, that human interaction, that is hands touching in whatever modality you might choose. This can be the most powerful thing in the world. So it doesn't. Whatever it is, if you're not overly invested in your method, and you welcome the deep connection that human bodies can make in the presence of one another, there's entrainment, there's resonance, healing is happening.
Cool.
It's an opportunity to elevate another person, or to let yourself be elevated with them when you yield over to these higher powers.
Yeah, there's nothing more powerful than actually A, reassurance, and B, a touch. No matter what the intent of the touch is, it's okay, it's all good.
Yeah.
And this isn't going to hurt, and we're going to hold your hand and we're going to do it with you.
Yeah.
We're not going to force you through a square hoop, as it were. Gil, thank you very much, as always.
A great pleasure, Julian.
Informative, inspiring, thought-provoking. And all we need now is it's pretty cold over here, I have to say.
It was supposed to be the coldest day of the year. It was 36 this morning.
Did I bring it with me from England?
No, I don't think it's 36 in England even. No, we're just having a little cold snap. We had a very warm fall and early winter, so.
Well, I'm glad I can be of service and give you a taste of our English winter.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been watching Gil Headley and with me, Julie Baker. Thanks, buddy.
You're welcome.
Like, it's in the body, it must have a physical cause. And anything that we don't yet have the technology to really map out very precisely. So a lot of the things that we are dealing with in a neuroscience domain and a psychological domain and a social domain, it's really difficult sometimes to put that into a concrete sort of understanding. And I think when we started to say, look, nociception most certainly is a physiological process. It's coming from the nerves. It involves all these things that so many people learn about. But pain is very different, and it involves memory and association. It has social aspects. It has perceptual aspects. It has affective and emotional aspects. It is an emotion. Pain is an emotion, and that was a big theme that we put through. When we explained it that way, it was much easier for people to understand. And I think it allowed them to kind of click and have that aha moment of like, okay, I get this now. And I think it really helped us to collaborate more successfully with people across multiple disciplines. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. So if pain is an emotion, if you're looking at it through that lens and you're going through an audit of how chronic pain patients are treated in the current system today, you'll see this gigantic disconnect. As someone who has spent a lot of time looking at this, explain to me what that looks like. What does the system look like for a chronic pain patient now? And then where are those gaps that we need to be bridging?
Absolutely. Well, certainly the system right now does not reflect the understanding of pain as an emotion. That is most certainly not what people are experiencing. So for the most part, pain is an incredibly common experience, just in general, right? And it's something we all deal with, but chronic pain is sort of special. It's its own thing, but still it's treated in, a lot of the same environments that any other, acute pain or nociceptive injury or other things. Do you see a lot of primary care, and you're going into a doctor who doesn't have a lot of time to sit down and work through what's going on and get a better understanding of the person as a whole. And so they hear pain, they assume orthopedic issue. They assume musculoskeletal issue. We need to get an x-ray. We need to see what's broken in you. Pain must mean something is broken. And so most patients are going through the system where the doctor sends them to go see what's broken. And two things can happen there. Well, three things can happen there. One, something may be broken and you can get it fixed, and that's great. But that's not the majority of people with chronic pain. That's not even close to the majority of people with chronic pain. The other thing that might happen is that the doctors are struggling to find a physical explanation for what could be causing pain and may write it off. And that's heartbreaking. And I think that, it must be devastating as a patient to experience this, to have this thing just taking over and be such a massive part of your day-to-day life, and to have to feel like you need to prove yourself that it's really happening, and to be told that there's no explanation for it, so it can't be real. I can't even imagine the additional stress that must put on a person, but it happens to many, many people, and the frustration of that is something that a lot of folks are aware of and really try to remain cognizant of. And the other thing that can happen is that a lot of times, unfortunately, there's maybe a physiological abnormality with a patient, but it is not a dangerous abnormality. It is nothing that correlates with pain. It is not causing pain. It's just something going on. Maybe their spine is slightly tilted. Maybe they have a herniated disc. Maybe there's just something going on where their spine is not the perfect textbook image of a spine. And doctors will say, aha, like this abnormality is causing your pain. And we know from a lot of studies that most of the abnormalities that we think in kind of the sort of standard parlance that we think are tied to pain, herniated disc or any number of spinal issues, we think they cause pain. And actually, when you look at MRIs of healthy people who don't experience pain, they also have these issues. So you kind of have a lot of people who are getting put either in this bucket of, we can't figure out what's wrong with you, maybe nothing is wrong with you, we don't know what to tell you, we don't know what to do, or people who have this, this definitely is what's causing the pain, we'll fix this with surgery, or we'll fix it with injections, or we'll fix it with something, and it will make your pain go away. And as I'm sure many people with chronic pain who are listening to this know for a fact, it maybe for a little while will make the pain better or go away, but it oftentimes will come back. And there's no clear explanation from a physiological perspective as to why that is. Now, neuroscience tells us why that might be, but a biomedical model does not. And so it creates a lot of confusion for providers and for patients alike. And the current system has really kind of created this cycle of purely sort of physiological interventions that don't take into account the other aspects that are involved in neuroscience. And so people really aren't able to get a good sense of what their pain is actually coming from, what it is, and what can be done to help with it. So I think in a lot of cases, the current system is it's not offering the information people need. It just doesn't offer that education, that information, and it certainly doesn't offer, at least in the mainstream, a lot of options for interventions in that area. So it's been pretty rough, and of course we're seeing a lot of the side effects trying to rely upon physiological interventions, and they have not been good. So we're really trying to move away from that and understand that, again, pain is an emotion. It's more aligned with an emotion than anything else, and to try to eliminate pain through physical means would be like trying to eliminate sadness through physical means, or anger or happiness. And so we have to think of it that way and kind of get a sense of what purpose does it serve, and when do we know it's kind of gone off the rails, and what can we do to get it back on the rails?
Yeah. And so what changes do you want to see in the system to get that on track, to get this neuroscientific perspective out there?
Sure. So the brain is a phenomenal organ. It's why there's a reason why it's my favorite part of the body, and part of that is that it's very bidirectional, and so it takes in a lot of information from our physical bodies, and it of course is the executive over our physical functions. But we also have this whole vast array of sensory systems, and we're able to take in information about our environment, and we're able to act on our environment through our behavior. And that side of things is completely absent from most mainstream healthcare right now for any kind of complex condition, but I think we see it very much in pain. So, we have this assumption, that the body is acting on the brain, and that's it. And it's so far from the truth. And what I would love to see, what would really flesh out a more accurate neuroscientific kind of understanding of pain, is to understand that it requires what is often referred to as a biopsychosocial solution. In other words, it requires a more holistic, sort of whole patient treatment that takes into account the fact that we're impacted by much more than the sort of involuntary signals we get from our bodies throughout the day. We also create a lot of things in our bodies through prediction and our brains trying to anticipate what's going to happen. We anticipate what's going to happen based on signals we're getting from our environment. We are changing our environments, and we need to sit down with each patient and get a sense of what is their environment, what are their beliefs about their environment, what are their beliefs about their own pain and their bodies, and how is all of this coming together? Why are they experiencing pain, more than they technically, than they should be? What's going on with this pain response? Why is pain being activated as, a default stress response? Or what's going on? And there's things we understand about this through like central sensitization, this learning of a pain response and associating that with stress and associating it with duress. And we know that this starts to happen, but the only way that you can sit down and kind of understand these things, pain catastrophizing is another really interesting and very critical process that's very social, psychological, and biological. This very significant fear of pain. Fear associations are very strong in the brain and can create a lot of really intense physiological responses. Pain catastrophizing is a very big aspect of that, and it can also lead to something called kinesiophobia, which is this fear of moving as a result of thinking it's going to cause pain. None of these things involves a singular physical, psychological, or social process. They are all highly interrelated. It's very complex. So we need to start putting together interventions that live in all of these areas. And we need to start considering not just biological, but also psychological and social aspects of complex conditions, particularly in this case of pain.
Yeah. So you have been basically tasked with doing that. Your goal is to significantly improve patient outcomes over the next 10 years, not just stick a Band-Aid on the current system or make a small change. You're trying to overhaul the system, which is no small task whatsoever. But you guys have put together a really exciting first step in that direction. So what can you share with me about the project that you're working on launching right now at United?
Sure. Yeah. So hey Bethany, can you go ahead and just
just fix it all.
Fix pain. No, and it's there's a team of very dedicated people who I'm very pleased that I get to work with, and we're all working towards this goal of what can we do to radically change and reconceptualize not only how we're treating pain, but how we even think of pain and how our patients think of pain. I think that to me is one of the biggest ones, is how do we create a system where people are educated and empowered to understand what's going on with their own bodies and have what they need, the resources they need to be their own advocates. So we are trying to put together an entirely new clinical approach to chronic pain, and it is going to be biopsychosocial. One of the things that's really particularly tricky about treating a complex condition like chronic pain is that it has no single root cause. And that's something that's really difficult to really kind of put out there in a biomedical system. People want to find the root cause and act on it to keep things from happening, keep things from getting worse, or to cure them completely. And so chronic pain has lots of potential root causes, and they act on each other, and they transform and they change. And in order to treat it effectively, we need to have interventions that are going on simultaneously that help people with all of the different issues that may be contributing to these chronic pain kind of outcomes. So we need to have things like, psychotherapy to discuss. A really common thing is that people will have trauma in their lives. And those traumas lead to a number of stressors and a number of associations related to anxiety and fear, and it can lead to a lot of physiological sorts of stress symptoms, and pain is a big one. And sometimes the processing through and understanding that trauma with a professional can be huge in understanding how your body learned these associations at the time in an attempt to be adaptive, and kind of getting a sense of how those things work and what was going on with yourself, and working with somebody on that, while also exploring movement therapy to get a sense of how movement in your body kind of feels for you, and exploring that with kind of ongoing therapy around your emotions and trauma, while also working in a group with people who also have chronic pain and have had experiences very similar to yours that you can talk to and socialize with and kind of gain support from, and not have to constantly, advocate for yourself as just being a person in pain. Like they understand where you're coming from. All those things happening together, they have a power that is much more than just stacking them on top of each other.
Grab a cup of coffee, sit back and listen to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life features stories to inspire and motivate you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Visit cyacyl.com.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. If you're of the mindset that your life is predetermined by your genes and DNA, then stay tuned for this life-changing interview. Our guest today, Dr. Bruce Lipton, a former medical school professor and research scientist, is an internationally recognized leader in the new biology. His groundbreaking research can lead us to the belief that our bodies can be changed as we retrain our thinking. Dr. Lipton contends that our thoughts can activate changes in the activity of the cell membrane and therefore alter our health and life. Dr. Lipton is the best-selling author of The Biology of Belief and Spontaneous Evolution. Good morning, Dr. Lipton.
Good morning, Joan. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks for joining us. Dr. Lipton, everything that I read in the book, The Biology of Belief, it makes so much sense to me, and I really hope that our listeners at the end of this interview walk away with this knowledge that they can apply to their everyday life.
Well, this is the most exciting part of the evolution that we're all experiencing right now, and that is a return to self-empowerment.
In the early days of your career, you were moving along and you were teaching and conducting important research, but on a personal level, you were not happy. What was going on in your life, and what was your thought process like at that time?
Well, I guess I was very successful on my professional level, and yet in my personal level, I never could find that satisfaction, that love, or whatever it was that I was seeking, that was in some, drive, internal drive. We're looking for something, that what I call today the honeymoon effect, and the harder I tried, the worse things got, and I then became much more of a laboratory recluse and hang out there because I wasn't doing that good, and basically I didn't understand it. I just contributed to the concept, that's just a fate in life, and that's just the way things work out. It turned out that's not true.
Bruce, whenever we talk about genes and DNA, people get turned off. They think that this is going to be something so deep that they'll never be able to understand. So in very simplistic terms, how is it possible that on a physical level our thoughts can alter our life and health?
Well, it's actually wonderful because the basic research I did is understanding is extremely simplistic, and it basically was I was cloning stem cells back in 1967, about 44 years ago, so I was really way back there. Few people in the world knew what stem cells were. I put one stem cell in the petri dish by itself. It would divide every 10 to 12 hours, so first there was 1, and then there were 2, 4, 8, 16 cells, and over 2 weeks I get thousands of cells. And then here's what the experiment was. I would take this large plate with thousands of cells and split the population up into 3 different tissue culture dishes and provide 3 different culture media, which changed the chemistry a little bit of the culture medium in each of the 3 dishes. Now, the point about this is the cells were cloned, meaning all the cells in the petri dish were genetically identical because they came from the same parent. Now, I put all these genetically identical cells into 3 petri dishes, but I changed the environment ever so slightly in each dish. And in one dish, the cells form muscle. The next dish, the cells form bone. And the third dish, the cells form fat cells. And if you ask the first major question, it says, well, what controls the fate of the cells? And and it's so simple. The fact is this, well, they were all genetically identical. So the first thing is this, you can't say that they had different genes or different genes were responsible at that point. The only thing that was different was the environment, the culture medium is what the cells live in. Now you say, well, okay, that's interesting. What does that mean? I say, well, the environment controls the genetics, the response of the cell to the environment. And then you go, well, that's nice, cells in a petri dish, big deal. And then I go, wait, when you look at yourself in the mirror and you see yourself as a single person, that's a misperception because in truth, a human body is made out of about 70 trillion cells. The cells are the living entities. So when you say me, you're really saying a community of cells. But the way I would look at it, here's an interesting way, is your body is the equivalent of a skin-covered petri dish. Because inside your skin is a culture of 50 trillion cells. So why is this relevant? Because whether the cells are in a plastic petri dish or a skin-covered petri dish, that doesn't make the difference. What makes the difference is what is the culture medium. And I say, well, in the petri dish in the lab, I put the culture medium in. I say, what about in the human body? I say, the culture medium is called blood. Blood, the composition of the blood, the chemical composition of the blood, like the chemical composition of the culture medium in the plastic dishes, the chemical composition of the blood controls the genetics and fate of the cells in the body in exactly the same way that the culture medium controls the fate of the cells in the dish. Now it comes to the next level and it says, well, what controls my blood chemistry? Where does this chemical difference occur in the blood? Because remember, chemical differences in the blood affect different genes. Well, it turns out it's the brain that releases the chemicals that control the genetic activity of the cells. And the significance about that is as you change your perception of the world, you change the chemistry of the blood. Well, you can feel that in your body as you perceive the world. If you're angry, you have a whole different feeling about in your body than if you're feeling in love. What you're actually is that the mind perception of love, the mind perception of fear, let's say, is connected with a brain chemistry that changes. So if I open up my eyes and I'm in love, the chemistry that comes out of my brain includes things like dopamine, which is the pleasure chemical that you feel through your body, oxytocin, which is a bonding chemical that tries to keep you attached to where that source of that pleasure comes from. Then you're also releasing your body things like serotonin and growth hormones. Well, if I added those same chemicals to my petri dish cells, they would start to exhibit exuberant growth and take care of themselves, maintenance of the cells, and the activity would increase the energy of the culture. And so basically I say, well, yeah, those same experiences that the cells have in a petri dish that humans have. That's why when you fall in love, you feel so healthy. You have so much energy. Your biology is running great. And that is because when you're in love, the chemistry the brain releases is very supportive. And then in contrast, I say, well, if you all of a sudden become afraid of something, I say, you release totally different chemicals. You no longer are releasing those pleasure chemicals and growth-supporting chemicals. You start releasing what are called stress hormones or inflammatory agents. And why is that important? Because in a state of fear, you want to change the function of the body, very, very importantly, because in growth, you're sitting there just open, taking things in, assimilating life and growing. But in fear, you shut yourself down and protect yourself, and you get ready for fight or flight because you're protecting your life. That's a response to a fear perception. So the relevance about the fear is that what happens is the chemistry that comes into the body in fear shuts down the mechanisms of growth and shuts down the immune system to conserve energy to run away from whatever that threat is. So what's the point? The point is this: our thoughts or perceptions about the world are translated into chemical secretions by the brain. The secretions go into the blood, which is the culture medium of the 50 trillion cells in my skin-covered petri dish, and the composition of the culture medium now controls the genetics, and this is a new science. When I first was doing research on this 40 years ago, this was not a scientific field. There was no awareness of it. But in today's world, in the last 10 years especially, this is the basis of a new science, how the environmental chemicals control the genetic activity, and rather than the genes controlling the chemistry, it's the chemistry that controls the genes. Why is this relevant? You change the chemistry by changing your perceptions, and when you change your perceptions, you change your genetic activity. And all of a sudden, why is this important? And it simply comes down to, when I was teaching in medical school, while doing this research, I was teaching something called genetic determinism. Your genes control your traits. Now, science doesn't really go there anymore, but the public is still getting the same old story that, oh, the genes control this and the genes control that. And it's like, that is a fake understanding. That is not true at all, because genes don't control anything. Genes are blueprints. It's the chemistry of the environment that selects the blueprints. And now we find that same chemistry in the environment not can only select the gene blueprint, it can modify the readout of the gene. And in fact, the way you respond to the environment, which results in the chemistry in your blood, that differential in chemistry can take one gene, which is a blueprint, and create 30,000 variations of products from the same gene blueprint. Point. I was teaching something called genetic determinism, genes control your life. That's victimization. That's what we were teaching people. You're a victim of your genes. You didn't pick them. You can't change them, and they control your life, and therefore, your heredity is really controlling the unfolding of your own life. And the new science completely goes the other way around and says, no, you can change the genes, which ones you have. You can change how they're expressed. You can change the readout of these genes, all by changing your perceptions and responses to the environment. And so the new science is mastery of your biology.
This happens on a much deeper subconscious level, doesn't it?
Well, that's the big issue. The first thing is we think we're running our lives with our conscious minds, and those are that mind is the important one personally, because that's the one that has our identity, our spirit, our source. We are, by definition, like the emanation of the conscious mind. So we say, well, my wishes of my conscious mind, I want to be healthy, I want to have a great relationship, I want a great job. These are the wishes and desires and activity that's promoted by the conscious mind. But now we find out that science has revealed that we only operate our lives only about 5% of the time from the conscious mind. 95% of our behavior is unconsciously controlled by habits or programs that we download into the subconscious mind. So which mind is controlling the chemistry of the body? And the answer is 5% of the time you create it with your conscious mind, and 95% of the time you are creating it from the programs that you acquire in your subconscious mind. And here's where the problem comes from. The fundamental programs in the subconscious mind were downloaded into our brains during the first 6 years of our lives. And this was a consequence of how the brain was operating. You can't be conscious, creative, unless you have data. So basically, consciousness in a human doesn't even really become a predominant brain activity, and that's measured by EEG, until after 6 years of age. First 6 years is download. That's where you get data. Then your consciousness uses the experiences and download and data to formulate how it's going to create a life. Well, here's the point. The fundamental beliefs then in the subconscious mind are not even ours. They come from other people. They operate unconsciously. That's why it's called subconscious. We're not even aware of it when we're doing it. And they control 95% of our lives. So are we living the lives that we want? And the answer is actually not really at all, because we're only controlling it 5% of the time to move that way. 95% is the behaviors and beliefs that we acquire during the first 6 years of our lives, playing out as habits and manifesting a life based on those beliefs, not on our creativity. But John, I have to tell you something very exciting, because say, well, what would happen if I was able to create my life with just my conscious mind?
My name is Carolyn Mace, and I'm a medical intuitive. And what that means is I have the ability to read energy, read and interpret the energy that the human body generates. And that energy contains data. What type of data? It tells me the data about your biography. And what I've come to believe is that your biography becomes your biology. And so by accessing the information that's in your bioenergetic field, that provides a whole new range of data that physicians can use to help in the healing process or to help to understand why someone has in fact become ill. Well, I would say this, uniformly, all illness is an energy block, right? Let's start with that as a fundamental premise. And what we're learning as we enter this new age of consciousness, we've been hanging out in it now in the foothills of consciousness for the last 30 or 40 years. What we've begun to realize about ourselves is that we influence what happens to our body, that we are not simply random victims of disease, that somehow we can accommodate the development of illness. And the general social mind has accepted the toxicity of alcohol and of smoking and of certain food products. But what we're also realizing, and this I think is making more of an impression too, is that beyond the physical contribution to our body that we have authority over, that is to say what we eat and whether or not we exercise and etc., we also influence what happens to our body by the quality of our thoughts and by the quality of our general attitudes about life itself. Now, under that category, which is, as we can well realize, a very broad category, but under that category, one would have to say that I've discovered through my teaching numerous workshops all over the world, which I have done now since 1987, that one's general attitude about life contributes a great deal toward the health of one's immune system, toward the health of your general rapport with this thing called anxiety and stress, right? And that another major contributing force is your sense of self-esteem. A third major contributing force is your sense of honor. What I never realized at all until I wrote my recent book, Anatomy of the Spirit, was I never recognized the role that honor played in the maintenance of health, nor in the process of healing, nor in the breakdown of health. That is to say, do dishonorable acts poison the body? And I'd have to say, yes, indeed they do. There's yet another thing I would add, and that's that in our emphasis in this New Age field about the fact that we create our own health, as it were, I think we've come across a truth that is, how do I say this, eternally true, but we are not yet mature enough to manage that truth. So that, for the most part, I don't think we tend to reduce that incredible truth to a personality choice, not realizing that truth resonates to the soul versus the personality. And in understanding those differences, you have people saying, why would I choose cancer? And they don't remember consciously choosing it, or when they evaluate themselves to look for negativity, all they do is evaluate themselves at the most superficial level, like I'm not mad today and I wasn't mad yesterday, therefore why am I sick? And they don't realize that we're dealing with long-term soul personality attitudes that are much deeper than the temporary evaluation of one's personality as to whether or not one has been happy or not for the last month. And another thing I would add And that's that in our effort to try to capture and control the nature of health and disease, which is what we're trying to do, I don't think we're going to master this as quickly as we think, nor do I think we're going to master it at all. I think it will always be one step ahead of us, this vague thing called health, this elusive thing called death, right? Because we aren't meant to stay here forever. That's simply not the case. So as long as we would like to, for as much as we'd like to prolong our lives, perhaps forever on good days and hardly to supper time on bad days, the fact is we don't really, I don't believe, have that kind of authority. I think we have authority over the quality, perhaps, of our lives, but I'm not certain that we do over the longevity factor. And finally, my last thing is that I think there's a whole category of people who become ill, and it has nothing to do with negativity as we understand it. I think one needs to recognize that illness is oftentimes a form, the way in which one receives direction in one's life, to change one's life, to go to become a different kind of person. And sometimes the teacher is illness, meaning that the source of it is not negativity, but rather it comes under an entirely different category. Well, The Creation of Health was a book that I wrote with my dear colleague Norm Shealy, who's a neurosurgeon and an expert in pain management in the United States. Norm and I started working together as a team. I am the obvious medical intuitive, he the physician. And we began working together way back in 1984. And at that point, I was living in New Hampshire, and Norm was living where he still does, which is in Springfield, Missouri. And he would call me with a patient in his office, and he would say, you know, I have Mary Jones in my office, and her age is 30. And I would start to get impressions, and these impressions would be about energetic patterns that related to specifically this person's background, or the stress this person was under, or issues, people that this person was still energetically clinging to in such a way that it was draining the individual. Well, eventually, I got clear enough to where I could see the development of illness in the energetic field. I would say to Norm, if this patient doesn't deal with this issue, then within 4 to 6 months, he will have pancreatic cancer. And what Norm would do then, of course, is he would focus his attention on getting the patient to deal with the psychological, emotional issue, withholding all the while my evaluation that said if this issue was not reconciled, then this illness would be the result. Through all these years, we had so many illnesses that resulted and so many illnesses that did not result, if you will, that we realized that I was very accurate at helping people. If they could change a pattern in the energetic field, there was a real likelihood they would not then get the physical illness. The other, what we did in this book is we told these case stories, and the rich part about Creation of Health is that it has what I realized in working with Norm is that there are specific energetic patterns behind the development of each illness. They are not random. There's a reason why pancreatic cancer, let's just deal with the pancreas for example. The pancreas is the organ in the body that is most affected by issues of responsibility. Now, what I realized is that when someone goes through, let's say, issues of low self-esteem, the pancreas, low self-esteem automatically converts to, I'm afraid to take responsibility for my life. It just makes you feel like you won't be able to do that. That can trigger a craving for something. What? It triggers an obsessive response in the pancreas. So you either crave alcohol or you crave food. All right? It also can lead to the development, I believe, of pancreatic cancer, diabetes. Or the other side of the issue of responsibility, I want to emphasize something. When I talk about the energetic causes of illness, I want to emphasize that I'm talking about extreme cycles. I'm talking about people who feel that they're responsible for everybody and it never lets up. They burn themselves out, and that, of course, creates a pancreatic problem. Every part of the body relates to certain issues of power and issues of stress, and that's what Norm and I articulated in The Creation of Health, and we back these up with all of our case studies.
People often understand Foucault's work to be about how power forms us. But near the end of his life, he was asking himself, what other ways to live can there be aside from the ones, right, that we've been taught to live? And so he went to the ancients and talked about the way the ancients understood caring for oneself.
The Greeks, the Romans, and so on.
Particularly the Greeks and early Romans. Focus most on the ancient Greeks. And what he wanted to do was not to say, here's a formula for how we should live now, that we should go back to the ancient Greeks. What he wanted to do, I think, instead, was to let us understand that there can be very different ways of living from the ways that we live now, so that the way in which we live now loses its grip of necessity on us.
Yeah. And how do you see that Foucault's thoughts are relevant in this neoliberal world with a lot of pollution, a lot of CO2 in the air, in the environment? In which way could Foucault be relevant?
I think there are at least two ways. Right? One way is that we think of ourselves, or we think of the ways in which we live as natural and inescapable. And if we think of it that way, then we're going to continue to contribute to environmental degradation and to all kinds of neoliberal practices. So by loosening the grip of that naturalness on us, he allows us to think in other ways. Another thing, more specifically, is that there were concepts of friendship that we can see back in the ancients. And when we see those concepts of friendship, that can allow us to form bonds with one another that are different from the bonds of networking and feelings that the other is simply there for me to invest in order to gain things. So we can look specifically at some of the practices of the ancients, not all of them, and see possibilities for how we might begin to relate to each other in non-neoliberal ways.
Has Foucault's thoughts and ideas also have had some relevance for you as a person?
I think so. I'll give you an example. He spent a lot of time studying the ancient spiritual exercises, ways in which we try to habituate ourselves, to form ourselves to be the kinds of beings we want to be through practice. Right? And this is something that I have tried to take up in my own life, and I think other people can take the notion of spiritual exercises up in their lives as well.
What do you mean with spiritual exercises?
Ways of forming oneself in ways that feel empowering. So, for instance, right, the ancient Roman philosopher Seneca said what you have to do is get up every day and ask yourself, how is it that I would like to live today? And think about that and carry that through your day. And then at the end of the day, ask yourself where you succeeded and where you failed. Right? And you do this every day, and you begin to form yourself into the person you want to be. That's an everyday type of spiritual exercise.